There we go. Good morning. All right, Lucas is here. And of course, AC is here. Actually, AC beat you in, Lucas. You beat me in, actually. So I'm going to go ahead and give you Megan Basham here. She's going to introduce the show for us.
That's kind of how the game is played. And that's why you see so many of these left-wing organizations willing to spend this money, because they recognize that the evangelical voting bloc is a hurdle for them. They keep running into that wall again and again. So this has been a part of their efforts to kind of try to break down that wall. One, through creating an appearance of a grassroots movement that is false, but also they're trying to take the influence of somebody like a Max Lucado or a Rick Warren or a Tim Keller or a Russell Moore and say, let's get them to take these positions. And then our hope is that their views will trickle down to people in the pews. So your average person in the pews will start to go, well, gosh, I don't really feel like this is good for me and my family, but I want to be a good Christian. I want to follow Jesus faithfully. So I guess I better start backing this. That's kind of in a nutshell how this works. That's kind of how the game is played.
All right. So that, like I said, is Megan Basham. And if you don't know who she is, she wrote a book. She's actually a reporter, I think, for the Daily Wire, a Christian woman. And she wrote a book that has been kind of all the rage one way or the other in Christian circles these days. And it's called Shepherds for Sale, and how evangelical leaders traded the truth for a leftist agenda. And I just became aware of this book recently. It came out last year. And good morning, Mr. Lucas. And it basically confirmed in my mind what I've been talking about a lot here, and to really anybody who'll listen. I have been, for the longest time, very aware of the leftist agenda pushing to come into the evangelical church, much like it did to the mainline denominations. And you guys have heard me talk a lot about the mainline denominations and how years ago their seminaries were infiltrated by people who had an agenda that wasn't the gospel, that had a leftist Marxist agenda. And they came into the seminaries and into the ministry of the mainline denominations. And I told you the story of a church we used to go to years ago where it was the Presbyterian church, I'll just say it. And in this area, they were resisting the call from the main PCUSA organization to perform gay weddings and affirm homosexuality. And San Diego Diocese was holding out. And so we went to a meeting at the head of the presbytery downtown San Diego, and people were asking the pastor down there, how did this happen? How in the world could we have gotten to this point? And he basically said, 50 years ago, we let the wrong people into our seminaries, and they trained the wrong people. They trained people the wrong way. They trained our pastors the wrong way. And now they're continuing to do it. He goes, but they're getting old, and fortunately they're going to die. And that was the only way he saw out of that. But the problem was that didn't solve the problem at all, because the pastors that those people in the seminaries, those seminary professors had trained, went on to lead their flocks in the way that they were trained, in the way of leftism, the way of this cultural Marxism that we have, wokeness, political correctness, whatever you would want to call. And the death of those, this was 15 years ago. So I assume most of those seminary professors he was talking about have passed away, but yet that particular church is still very much in the woke and politically correct leftist progressive camp, because those seeds were planted and they're not going to go away that quickly. So let's see. These leaders are tricking people into thinking that Jesus Christ had conformed to them and their new ways. It's the other way around. You are conforming to Jesus Christ, those fools. Okay, Mike, thanks for the comment. And I had Lucas says, I had a Max Lucado Bible when I first started my walk with Jesus. I now read out of an Amplified Bible now. Okay. All right. So when you're talking about the way, there's something called the third way. And that was coined by Tim Keller back in the culture wars. Well, I assume they still are pretty hot. The culture wars are still pretty hot. But back when they were more, a little more pronounced and things weren't quite set the way they are now. And Tim Keller started what he called the third way, which is not the way of the conservatives to speak out, especially on social issues. And when we're talking about social issues, we're talking about abortion and gay marriage, which was upsetting our culture, that evangelical churches and evangelical Christians weren't getting with the program and affirming these things that, everybody else is. And that's what Megan Basham points out in her book, that the evangelical right, I guess you'd call it, is the most powerful voting bloc in the country. It is the single biggest obstacle in the way of the leftist agenda, the Marxist progressive left agenda in this country. And the presence of the religious right, if you want to call it, or evangelicals, is preventing them from instituting their goals, their leftist goals. So what they decided to do, much like the mainline denominations 70 years ago, they have decided to start infiltrating the evangelical churches. The only problem is evangelical churches, by their nature, aren't structured the way the mainline denominations were. Because if you wanted to infiltrate the Presbyterian Church or the Episcopal Church, say, it was very clear, you would go to one of their seminaries, get a leadership position, or insert someone into a leadership position there, a seminary professorship or a dean, and start planting the seeds of your progressivism in that seminary. And it worked. And it was a deliberate effort. It wasn't an effort to enhance those churches. It wasn't an effort to increase their influence in the culture. It was an attempt, a very successful attempt, to destroy them from within. That's what happened to the mainline denominations. They were destroyed from the end very deliberately. And now they are culturally ineffective. They have no effect on the culture at all, no influence on the culture at all. And if you go to most of their churches, a large number of those churches in all the mainline denominations have rainbow colored flags and political banners all over, leftist political banners, and they're mainly empty except for elderly people who grew up in those denominations when they were somewhat faithful to the word, and they never left them. And they've compromised, like Megan said, they want to be good Christians, so they went along, right? But with evangelical churches, it's not that easy to do. Okay, there's no central seminary for non-denominational evangelical churches. Now, there are a lot of seminaries around the country, and some denominations, that is, Southern Baptist. Megan gets into the Southern Baptist Church very heavily in this book, because that is a very structured denomination. And if you get into the Southern Baptist Seminary, you can't have a lot of effect. And that's what's happened. This is Southern Baptist Church is the largest evangelical denomination out there. And if you paid any attention at all to the Southern Baptist Convention, you know that there's been huge battles there on racial issues, on all kinds of progressive things, and the progressives are having big victories in the Southern Baptist Convention, the Southern Baptist Church. So even that stalwart of evangelicalism is falling. So that's what's happening, and that's what she points out in this book, except it's not so much it's not being done from the foundation of the denominations itself. They're trying to do it through money, large foundations. And one of the things that's hard to read about this book, at least in the first chapter, is she describes the way that these leftist organizations, headed by people like George Soros, the Rockefeller Foundation, all these different people with a lot of money, progressive institutions with a lot of money, these foundations are set up. And reading through the first couple of chapters of this book, you have to sort through all these acronyms that she gives. And they're very hard to follow, because the plan seems to be, or the method seems to be, that, say, someone like George Soros wants to donate a lot of money to help subvert the Southern Baptist Convention. So he has a foundation, and he sets up another foundation, and he funds that foundation, and that foundation gets in contact with a foundation within the Southern Baptist Convention and starts working with them and starts trying to convince them to start supporting, not necessarily compromising their core beliefs. That's the way the mainline denominations seem to have done it. What they do is they come in and they try and convince whoever people are ahead of that foundation or that organization within the Southern Baptist Convention to get their pastors and lay people to pressure, or actually get their pastors to pressure their lay people to not necessarily change their beliefs, but to start supporting different legislation that was coming, that had been proposed during, say, the last 20 years. On something like climate change. Climate change is the first thing she tackles in the book. She describes how George Soros and people like him started these foundations that got in contact with foundations within evangelical churches and organizations to try and get their pastors from the pulpit to tell their congregation, to tell their flock, that we need to take climate change seriously. They didn't say present it as a debate. They didn't say present both sides of the issue, because it is a very complex issue. It's not, the science on climate change, no matter what you hear, has not been settled. There's a lot of people that have very good scientific arguments that say this is not going to be a problem. It's not man-made, whatever. Okay. There's lots of different things going on within climate change. There's lots of different arguments, or lots of different factors to continue to consider. So what they say now is we have to not only change our thinking on climate change, we need to support legislation. We need to contact our representatives and tell them to support this and that legislation. So, and with that, like Megan was saying, the more that's pounded into the people in the congregation, even though that doesn't sit right with them, it has an effect. Like, my pastor is saying this, and pastor down the street is saying this, and I'm hearing this from guys like Tim Keller, or so Max Lucado or whatever. Maybe that's right. Maybe I should reconsider that. Maybe I should contact my representative and be obedient Christian, and tell him he needs to vote for this, legislation proposed by John McCain and Joe Lieberman or whatever, right? Squishy Republicans and nonpartisan types, right? So that's how it's done. And later on in the book, she talks about things like the pro-life movement, and again, gay marriage, those kinds of things. And this has been something that I have been seeing for probably the last 20 years at least. She doesn't really name it, and no one really has put their finger quite on what I think is the origin of this. It actually goes way back. When I was, like I said, when I was in college, during the Reagan years. Okay, I've been in high school through the Carter years, right? And then when I was in college, the religious right was ascending. Okay, it was surging, and there was what it really did was Reagan and the people in the religious right, as many mistakes as they made, they still came out and stood for biblical principles on things that have been sliding since the mainline denominations have been sliding, right? So because of the mainline denominations fading because of their compromise into progressive Marxist thought, the evangelical church ascended. It started to become more and more outspoken and more powerful, and started growing. And yeah, there was a lot of mistakes made on how you do that, how they were affecting culture and politics, but at least they were saying something and they were doing something, right? So that's why a lot of people who had been distressed by all the mainline denominations falling latched on to the religious right, say back then, and they started having a huge effect, not only on politics, but on culture as well. So, but back then there were voices on the left, Christian voices on the left, guys like, Tony Campolo and Jim Wallace, guys like that who resisted this, but they didn't really have much of a voice. And they have always been around. They're still around. But they never really had much effect on the evangelical church because they didn't have a lot of money behind them and they weren't that influential. And again, there wasn't a central seminary or a central hub to attack, to put your people in. But when I think this really started coming to the fore was around the turn of the century, when we had the emergent church and the emerging church. Okay. Guys like Brian McLaren and people like that who started this movement. It was mostly among young people to be more culturally relevant in your worship, for sure. This is when the new kind of the new way of worship, a lot of multimedia, a lot of emotive singing mostly, repetitive choruses, things like that, and smoke machines and multimedia and all these things, darkness, right, in the worship service, all that started to come to fore. The goal was to not necessarily to teach truth and to challenge people in their faith, but it was to make people comfortable. It was to give them a good emotional experience, and it was to get them on an emotional high. Okay. And so they can get into the worship and get into the music, and the sermons that went along with it were not going to bum that high, as they used to say. All right. They weren't going to bring down that high. They were going to be feel good sermons too. And there's one thing that really comes out when you look at scripture, is that Christianity, there should be joy in Christianity. You should, you should bring all your thoughts under Christ. It should be peace. There should be joy. But it's not necessarily a good feeling all the time. Okay. It's not necessarily going to be warm fuzzies. You're not exactly going to have a great emotional experience. You can have peace without an emotional high. You can have joy without woohooing. Okay. There's an inner peace that the fruit of the Spirit, you love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. You get the fruit of the Spirit, but you don't always get an emotional high, and you don't always have fun. Okay. But again, this movement that started, like I said, about 25 years ago, said no. It came up from a generation that was given participation trophies and was always told how great they are, and they just build their self-esteem. This came out of the self-esteem movement. I want to get to why I'm kind of very choppy as soon as I try to bring this up, but hopefully it's up now. 1 Peter 2, 7-8. And make sure it's added to the stage here. See it? I'm going through lots of going actually. Am I here? In case I'm not, that what it says is basically are we here? No sound. Okay. Am I back? Yes, my internet is lagging. Yeah. So I don't know if I'm back on, but I'm just going to keep going. If it's there, it's there. If not, it's not. Okay. So 1 Peter 2, 7-8. Now to you who believe, this stone is precious, but those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and a stone that causes people to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the message, which is also what they were destined for. Okay. So, hear you. Okay, good. We're back. Okay. Not sure how much you caught that, but okay. So, 1 Peter 2, 7 and 8, like I said, now to you who believe, the stone is precious, but to those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and a stone that causes people to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the message, which is also what they're destined for. Okay. So that's what we have now happening in the evangelical church. We are trying to soften the message. We are trying to soften the offense that Jesus is to those who don't believe. Okay. And they don't believe. Face it, our culture is anti-Christian. It's a post-Christian culture. It doesn't want to hear what we have to say. It doesn't want us to influence things. So Megan Basham's book, I would very much recommend you guys read this. It's Shepherds for Sale. I'll cover up the unpaid promo there, but there are people, powerful organizations who have infiltrated our churches, the institutions associated with our churches. They're spending a lot of money through a lot of different organizations to try and get the main obstacle to their Marxist leftist agenda, which is evangelical Christians, evangelical Christians who vote. And if they can even get 10% of us turned and buying what they're trying to sell us, then that will help pave the way for the complete changing of our society, for the complete undermining of our Judeo-Christian Western American culture. And Megan Bastion has pointed them out. She's named them by name. She's getting all kinds of blowback from evangelical leaders, and she is over target. Okay, she has really exposed them for who they are. And like I said, this is something that I've seen coming, that I've been kind of lonely screaming at some of my churches saying, hey, this is coming. This has been coming for years. And it's infiltrated all different kinds of things. Guys like Tim Keller and Max Lucado, Russell Moore, all these guys who are saying, no, we need to moderate our position on these things. We don't need to speak out loudly on these things. We need to speak in whispered tones when it comes to sexuality and marriage. We need to get on board with the climate change agenda, and we need to support legislation that does that. All that is designed to weaken the influence of evangelical Christians in our culture, so it will pave the way to bring in this Marxist, progressive, utopian agenda that these people have. And we need to be aware of it. Your pastor needs to be aware of it. The people in your congregations need to be aware that this is happening. And again, when I read this book, before I even read this book, I knew that she was onto something, because this is something that I've been seeing. And I have been sitting with Christian friends of mine lately that have heard me for the last 15, 20 years talking about these kinds of things. And they're saying, Joel, how did you know this was coming? To me, these kinds of things are obvious. I could have told you that these same pastors were doing that, and these same influences were coming to turn the church into an ineffective, feel-good seminar with struggle sessions, just like the mainline denominations have been for the last 30 years. They're trying to make us just as ineffective as that, and we can't let it happen, because we are the last hope for our culture, because we're the lone stumbling block. We're the lone barrier to the complete, like Barack Obama said, the fundamental transformation of the United States being made complete. Okay. And Christians, a lot of Christian leaders will try to tell you that, the conservative beliefs that we have are not the right way. There's a third way, somehow compromising with the left on these things. And there is no third way. Okay. All that means is they have been compromised and they have been bought. I've seen it with several of the churches that I have attended over the years. They all seem to have gone this way. And that seems to be the story of Christianity. God's people, God blesses his people. They turn their backs on God. He takes away the blessing, and then he gives the blessing to someone else. So if it happens, I'd hate to see that happen here to the United States, because we have been that shining beacon on a hill. We've been on that city on a hill for liberty and for Judean Christian values, and for a nation that started off following God and laying the foundation as a Christian nation, because that's what we were. And don't let anybody tell you that we weren't. So for all of you who are in churches like that, there are voices out there resisting. What happened with Charlie Kirk has really revived a lot of people that were asleep through this. Okay. It became very clear what the different sides are. It is very clear what the different sides within Christianity are now. Even people are saying that there's the Charlie Kirk way and then there's the Tim Keller way. Okay, Tim Keller was the one who quoted the third way, saying, hey, we need to soften our stances on a lot of these things. We need to go along with a lot of these things. We need to earn the right to be heard. We need to be winsome. We need to, all these kinds of things. Where the Charlie Kirk way was, we need to face these things straight on with the gospel, with the confidence that we have in the Word of God, that He has answers to all of these issues. We need to stand firm. That's the Charlie Kirk way, I guess, now. So we have Kirkism and we have Kellerism, I guess. But I'll be talking more about this because this is a big deal right now. And this book came out last year, but it's kind of had a resurgence now after Charlie Kirk's death. And this is the conversation that a lot of people are having now, and it needs to be the conversation that we're having now. So I've run over time. Sorry about the lagging. I don't know how much I came through, and I was stumbling around there, but it comes back to me as lagging too. So, but thanks for tuning in. And Ben's not going to be here tomorrow, but I will be, and we'll be talking about the government reopening. And then I'll probably take up this subject again next week. Okay. So I will see you then. Thanks for listening, guys. Thanks for putting up with all that. Take care.